Well, good morning, everyone, and how are you doing? We have one for you today, boy. How you doing, Fernando?
Good. How are you?
Oh, yeah, rocking. So, like I said, we have a good one. We have a great one for you today. We have a Mustang. That's right, and it's a newer Mustang. Let me show you what's got in it from the factory first. That'll help you wrap your head around what we're doing. So in each door we have a subwoofer, which is just like a 6-inch. We have a mid-range. Up in the dash we have a tweeter. We have a big touchscreen. And then of course in the back we have some rear speakers. What makes this system cool is that big touchscreen and those subwoofers in the door. This is a Ford Mustang premium audio system. It's called a shaker. Now what that means is that there's a factory amplifier in here. That doesn't mean there's a cool amp pro for it, because there isn't, but that's okay. And we're gonna get to that, because it's kind of exciting. Let me show you the factory amplifier. If you come down into the driver's footwell and you look up, there's your factory amplifier. There's 3 plugs attached to it, a black, a gray, and a tan. Just so happens to be these guys here. Before we get to talking about all the excitement involved with that, let's talk about now what's going in this car. Start out with, we're going with the cool Flax 3-way set. That's a mid-bass, mid-range, and tweeter. Big crossover. We're going with some Flax coaxials for the rear. We're going with this little workhorse of a battery. This is the SPP 680. This guy is tiny and it is tons of power, tons of power. They actually make an SPV 44. This is bigger, it's half the size. We're gonna do some roadkill. We're gonna sound deaden the heck out of it. Amplifier wise, we're going with audio control. We're gonna do the LC 1.800 and the D 4.800. The D means it has the DSP built into it. We're also gonna be doing 2 R-Type 10s and an enclosure in the trunk. We're gonna build a false floor to house everything up where the spare tire goes in this area here. And that's about it for the actual equipment. In my head I'm thinking, it's just a couple amplifiers, some speakers. This one's gonna go, it's not gonna go quick. This one's gonna take a while. This is gonna be a big install. It's gonna be a lot of little tiny things that we're gonna have to do. One of them being getting to that amplifier. I like to eat my vegetables first because typically they're the most unenjoyable part of the meal. I like to get into the radio first. Anytime we're doing any form of integration, you have to do that first. You have to figure out how you're integrating your system into this car or the car you're working on. So let's head over to the kick panel and we're gonna start doing some investigation work there and figure out what we're working with. So to test this Mustang, we're gonna use a bunch of tools that we have to do this, which I'll show you in a minute. Now, you guys might not have all these tools. I understand. However, if you go back, we did a install diaries on a Chevy Cruze Part 1. In that video, we showed you how to do the same exact thing we're doing, but we showed you how to do it with a variety of different tools, 9-volt batteries, cheaper ways to do it than what we're going to use here today. We're going to use a notebook where we've already added in some of the information that we need: make, model year, where the amplifier is located, how many plugs, the speaker layout. We have digital multimeter, we have a PT9A polarity tester, we have just a generic test speaker, tone generator, PAA3 RTA. The other thing that we're going to need is a cool set of test leads. These are just leads that we pulled out of previous plugs that we've worked on. They're real tiny because the holes on these 3 plugs that are here are super tiny. Speaking of the plugs, let's talk about them for a minute. On this amplifier, as we said, there's 3 plugs. There's a black, a gray, and a tan. If your plugs have tape all the way over them like these did, go ahead and remove those. Just be careful, don't cut the wires while you're removing the tape. When you're looking at the plugs, you're gonna see skinny wires like this one and fatter wires like this one. More than likely, the fatter wires are gonna be your speaker wires. Go ahead and disregard the skinny ones for right now. We'll get back to those. When you're doing something like this, always go for the easy, low-hanging fruit first. In this case, that would be the speakers. We wanna find all the speakers first because that'll eliminate a lot of the wiring here, because we need to get to other things that are gonna be harder to find. Digital multimeter, come into this harness. A lot of the times the speaker manufacturers will put twisted pairs into the plugs to help reduce noise, and it does make our jobs a little bit easier. In this case, the brown plug, we have 3 twisted pairs. You just don't want to tone those because they could also be data wires. Test those first with our digital multimeter. We'll set to continuity. It says 8 ohm. 8 ohms is a little high most of the time for cars, but it's not unheard of. Some are 16, some are 3.3, some are 2, some are 4. It can be all over the board. Let's test the other ones and see what they are. That'll give us a baseline. That one is 8, and that one is 8 as well. What we have is 3 8-ohm wires going across the top of this harness that are twisted together. That's a pretty good chance that it is a speaker. There's 2 devices that we're going to use for this. We're going to use our tone generator, and then we're going to use our PT9A polarity tester. Make sure your tone generator's volume is turned all the way down when you start. Get your wires connected, and then turn it up slowly. That's definitely a speaker. Switch to our polarity tester. It's gonna make a popping sound that we'll be able to meter with our handheld polarity tester. You hear the tick?
Red.
That's red. Flip it. They're both green. In this, the mid-range in the door and the tweeter and the dash are on the same channel. Make sure you polarity test both speakers if they're on a parallel channel like this, because sometimes they can be wired up backwards. And that's fine for the factory, but you may not want that in your application. In this case, our red wire here is going to a purple gray and a yellow gray. First wire that I mentioned is always going to be positive. The second wire I mentioned will always be negative. If I don't mention negative and positive, whatever I said first was positive. A lot of the times the car manufacturers will put things in order, meaning if this is positive, this is negative, and the next one will be positive, negative, and positive, negative. But don't take that for granted. It's not always the case, as you'll see in the cruise video. Go to our next one. All right, that's the center channel popping right now. In this case, we have a light green that is positive and a yellow gray. Test our last set here. Getting a green light, that means we have it correct. Come back over here. Light green blue and a gray blue. There is 3 other wires on this harness. 2 big fat ones and a skinny little one. Turn our digital multimeter to DC, which is the line with the dots beneath it. Probe those guys. My guess is they're power and ground, and that would be the case. There's a blue red that is power and a black gray that is ground. There is this 3rd guy right here, this little blue green. Let's see if that is possibly an accessory. Meter with the car off, we have nothing. Cycle the ignition on, and it's a 6-volt trigger. A lot of the times the Ford amplifiers do turn on with 6 volts. That's why in some of the older vehicles, if you have like a popping sound, if you just directly hook it up to the radio, that would be why. Done with the brown harness, move over to the gray harness. The wires on the brown harness, the top row was all the speakers. They didn't go up and down, they went across. Looking at the gray harness, it looks like it does the same thing. Start here, test the first set of wires on here and see what we're getting for an ohm load. This one is giving us a 4. Let's move it to the next one. Same thing. Let's go down below. Same thing. Same thing. So all 4 of them are giving us a 4 ohm load. Test with our tone generator. Remember, start with the volume low. Alright, so that's a speaker. Speaker, speaker, speaker. Found the 4 other speakers in the car, which are the door subwoofers and the rear speakers. Polarity test them. The PT9A just makes a tick, tick, tick sound. This guy right here reads it. We're ticking. Let's go meter the speaker. First one up is going to be the passenger rear. And what we're looking at here is a brown white is positive and a brown blue is negative. Let's move on to the next speaker. The passenger subwoofer, white purple and a white orange. The next pair is the driver's rear, white green and a brown yellow. Last speaker, be a white and a white brown. There's no other wires on the gray harness. We have these 2 harnesses all figured out. That leaves us this black harness here. Now the black harness is packed. It's a 16-pin harness and all 16 pins have something going on in them. When you cut the tape back, you find that there is a bundle of wires that are all grouped together. My guess is those are the signal wires. What we want to do now is test that theory. To test that, we are going to use our digital multimeter and our PAA3 RTA. Depending on what type of car you have, for example, let's say like a Chrysler, some Toyotas, and some of the newer Fords, the radio produces all the signal and it just feeds back into the amplifier. But it's not an amplifier in the sense that you're thinking. It's actually part of the radio. They've just separated it into 2 boxes. So coming out of the radio is a right and left fixed, non-variable signal. It doesn't move. I mean, it doesn't care what you're doing on the volume control. The signal stays flat all the way across. across, gets into the amplifier, and then the amplifier is talking to the radio via the bus of the car. As you turn up and down the volume then talks to the amplifier and tells the amplifier to go up and go down. And the amplifier is where all the fader control is built in. It's got obviously front, rear, left, right. It's all done in the amplifier digitally, just like it would in an aftermarket radio. It'd be done in the radio, because you have to think of them as one piece. Even though they're two pieces, internally they see each other as one piece. In some cases, there's also separate outputs for like backup sensors. There could be things like ANC or automatic noise canceling, and those are going to be done a lot of the times back at the amplifier. When you're testing, if you find a signal output and it's just flat and doesn't do anything with the volume, you have a non-variable voltage out. Now, a lot of those are what amp pros are built for. An amp pro has the ability to talk to the CAN bus in the car and go, oh, okay, I'm going to take that flat left and right output, put it into my little box. It also has the data wires going into it, do my balance and fader, do my volume control. That's why that works, because all it's doing is talking to the data bus in the car, just like the outboard amplifier would do. It's kind of cool. What we're hoping for is the opposite. We want variable voltage output, meaning that the volume knob on the radio is the volume knob on the radio. As you turn that up and down, the outputs of the radio that go into an amplifier move up and down, just like an aftermarket radio does. Volume up, volume down, boom, real simple. If it has that, we're awesome. We can go before the amplifier, because it's a variable voltage output, just like a normal aftermarket radio. We can put some RCAs on it, we're good. We want to test to see if this is variable. Now, if it's not variable, that means we have to go after the amplifier. Now, going after the amplifier in this case is going to be fun. We're going to have to do summing, because this speaker here and this speaker here and the tweeters in the dash, that's all front, and they're on 4 channels because you have left and right, 2 in each side. And we're going to need to bring those together, because the low that this is going to play is not enough to feed the new 6.5. It's not going to play down far enough, because these are going to be actively crossed over. We need to sum this with this. The amplifier we've picked for this has the capability to do that. It actually has front 4-channel input, so we can run the front tweeter in, we can run the front mid in, and we can sum the two together to get a 1 full range input. Hopefully we won't have to do that. We need the RTA so we can see what the signal looks like, but if you don't have one, you can still test variable voltage with the digital multimeter like we're going to show you. The other nice thing is, a lot of the times the EQing is done at the amplifier, not at the radio. That's kind of nice. When you sum, you don't get that fortunate. You have to de-EQ it, and it can get hectic. When we set the meter to AC, because sound is AC, the V with the squiggly line, we have our RTA. We can hook up to these outputs and we can see what's going on. We're also going to need the test speaker once we get this done. Well, we'll talk about that when we get to this, one step at a time. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. When doing this test, it's best to have a signal that is fixed. For this, we're going to play a pink noise over the stereo. This will give us a nice flat response output. Pink noise just sounds like this, but to a meter, it's great. Start with our digital multimeter first, playing our pink noise, turn the volume down. And as you can see, our meter is going down and our meter is going up. That's a good thing. That means that whatever this channel is connected to is variable voltage. Look at our RTA, and this is what we got coming out of here. Turn it back down. As we can see, the sound level goes down and the sound level goes up. Now, this isn't the greatest output ever out of a radio. This is actually EQ'd very badly. So we know what we're gonna have to do is we're gonna have to fix this. Even though it's an input into the amplifier, apparently there is some form of equalization being done in the radio, and it's giving us this nasty curve here. Test the next set, it's giving us the same thing. Same nasty curve. We'll test the next set, same, and then finally the last set, and we're getting the same. So there's 4 outputs. On this harness, there just so happens to be an extra set of wires. We'll test those, and they don't give us anything. We know that these guys here are definitely our signal. Now what we have to do is figure out which one is front, rear, left, right. And to do that, we're gonna go ahead and go back to the radio, and we're gonna balance over here to the driver's front. We'll bounce to the passenger front, and we'll work our way through it, and that'll tell us what set of wires is which. Faded connected the radio to driver's front. First one we plugged into is giving us sound. Let's try the next three just to make sure. I got no sound, I got no sound, I got no sound. Telling us that the first two wires on this plug are the drivers. I don't know it's positive and negative yet, but we know that the first two are drivers. So that is a green and a gray. Let's write that down. Go to driver's rear, test again. We have sound on that one. No sound, no sound. Actually, that looks more gray. The first one should be green and white. That'll be green and gray. Move to the passenger rear speaker. We'll test the next two. All right, we don't get anything out of that. But the last set we do. A purple, white, and a blue. So this should be our last set. And sure enough it is. That is going to be a purple, yellow. Now we know what all the colors are for our four corners of the car. What we want to do now is do some polarity testing. For that, we're going to go ahead and put the radio back in the center. We need our test speaker, our polarity tester, play the speaker pop app on our phone into the stereo. This is going to give us a pop, pop, pop. Plug our test speaker into the front. We're going to get a popping sound out of it. And we're getting a green, which means it's correct. Green is positive and the white is negative. Test all the other ones. So that's green again. Passenger door. So that's the purple through the rear. The white is positive. Just to make sure that it's not doing something silly, switch these two. Now we should be getting a red. And of course we're getting a red. Now we know we have variable voltage. We have positive and negatives figured out. This car has no backup sensors. This car has no ANC microphones. That's what Ford calls it, ANC, automatic noise canceling. Could also be, it sucks, whatever it is. You can test for that by looking on the headliner. There's little tiny round microphones positioned on the headliner. There's 3. If you unplug them, cancel the issue. The one thing this does have is CarPlay though, which means it's going to talk. Now when this does CarPlay, it talks out of the front 3 speakers, meaning the driver, the center, and the passenger. All 3 of them. Doesn't matter if it's this talk, they all talk. We want to make sure that it's not passing into this some other way. So to do that, we have our test speaker still here. Plug it into the front speaker. What's the weather like today?
Starting in the afternoon with mixed conditions.
She's talking out of the speaker, so she's coming over this. And the other thing you'd want to test for is backup sensors. If there's backup sensors, figure out where it's coming from before you disconnect the amplifier. So we checked all that. We walked around the car and made sure it didn't have any of that stuff. Figure out what speaker it's coming out of. Sometimes backup sensors just come out of the rear speakers. Sometimes they come out of the front speakers. Test that stuff. Figure out where it's coming from so that you can then test that to make sure you're going to be amplifying those signals again. Because if you're not, it doesn't matter how cool we just got here. If those signals aren't coming through the factory amplifier, you may have to find another way to retain those. At this point, we're doing really well. We know that the EQ curve sucks, so that's okay because we have the D series amplifier, which is going to allow us to fix that. We figured out all the other ins and outs of this harness. Now comes the tricky part, integrating into this harness. No one likes to cut harnesses. Okay, we don't like to cut harnesses. There's a lot of you guys out there that like to cut harnesses. Well, maybe not you guys, but there's a lot of guys out there that cut harnesses. These do look reminiscent of other harnesses. And for me, the one harness I'm most concerned with is the signal one, because these are tiny wires. I would hate to have to cut this off and try to solder into it. But it does look like another harness that we've seen before. It looks like a GM harness. I just so happen to have a GM harness right here. And once you know it, it plugs in. What this is telling me is that we do have a harness for this. There's 10 other wires on here that I have no idea what they do. I don't know if we need to have them plugged in for like the radio to work in the gauge cluster. I don't know anything about that. My thought is that a T-harness for this would probably be a good idea. I'm gonna see if we have some form of a T-harness to work with this. The gray harness looks identical to the black harness, just gray. And it is. This is going to give us our front subwoofer, and our rear speakers are in this harness. The brown harness, however, there is nothing like the brown harness, which is okay. There's only 3 speakers on here, which is the top door, mid-range, the center, and the other side. They're a big enough wire to where we can actually cut these high enough up and be able to solder them back on, or just solder in some connections. We found 2 of the 3 harnesses. That's a good thing. We are going to have to cut 3 pairs of wires, but we'll make sure we do so that it's easy enough to put it back together.
First thing we want to do is take the door panel out. We're going to grab our plastic pry tool and carefully on the handle we're going to pry it out. It's only one plug, so we disconnect it. And behind that, it's a 10 millimeter. Under the panel right here, it's two 7 millimeter. We switch it to the 10 millimeter. Behind this handle, it's another 10 millimeter. You grab your angle pick tool, just pry that one out. Grab your plastic pry tool again, and try to go around the door panel carefully. We have two plugs and the handle that we need to unclip. Now our panel is free. This car we have 6.5, the 3-inch. We're gonna roll the window up. We can roll kill all the back. We have all the back piece with roll kill and everything. Install the fast rings. The first piece is gonna be the circle. You see right here we have a bar. We're gonna cut it. The fast ring can go a little bit up, and then we're gonna trim it because the window actually is gonna hit the foam, so we have to trim the foam twice. Trim the back piece of the fast ring. Install it, have the perfect center for the speaker. For this car we're gonna use the brackets BKFS B152 from Best Kits, of course. And this one actually it's really nice, fits perfect. You might have to take these little brackets out, depends of what kind of speaker you use. For this one we're gonna break it out. In my bracket, I'm making new hole just to run my speaker wire to the outside. We already put some foam in the back, foam in the front. Before I put the speaker and run my wire, I like to trim the front of the roll kill just to make that shape. The roll kill is done. We're gonna install the second piece of the fast ring. And also we're gonna install foam in the back of the 3.5. For the 3.5, we go and put some ferrule, heat shrink, install this. This door is done. We're gonna move to the back deck to start roll kill and put the speakers on.
At some point during one of these shows, someone asked, why would you replace your factory speakers? Well, because. Let's take a look at what is in this shaker system from the factory. We'll start from the back. In the back we have this guy right here. We have a paper cone with a foam surround. It does have the acoustical foam that's going to allow it to marriage up to the rear deck. It uses a neo magnet. The basket is made out of plastic. Not bad. But what we're looking at here is this is paper and it's in the rear deck of a car. This is where the sunlight is going to come in, and we use some real crappy materials for that in mind. Paper. If you guys have ever taken a speaker out of a car that, let's say, 3 or 4 years old, what happens? The paper, well, it fades and eventually just turns to dust. Foam, really not the most UV thing out there. Granted, the window is going to have UV and tint. This still is not the greatest material to use for a rear deck. Moving on to the front. In the dash, we have this tweeter right here. Now, as far as tweeters go in factory, size-wise, this one isn't too bad. This is a full 1-inch cloth tweeter, so it's going to have a nice smooth sound to it. Neo magnet's got a capacitor on it. This is not a bad tweeter. I didn't really sit and listen to it, but as far as like if I was to look at this tweeter, I'd be like, well, that's not bad. Back to the mid-range in the door, we have this 3.5-inch standard 2-hole 3.5. Uses a neo magnet, has 12.5 watts of power handling, and it is an 8 ohm, which is what we saw earlier when we were metering these things. This is made out of paper. The surround is made out of cloth. It's got a little bit of acoustical foam to help it marriage up with the door panel. 3.5 wise, it's not terrible. I mean, a lot of the 3.5 use this. It is in the door, so you don't have to worry about too much UV. However, it is in the door, which means there's a possibility it's going to get wet, because when rain comes in the door, typically it splashes this way into the car and it'll run over this. So here's the subwoofer, or the mid bass. We don't really call it a subwoofer, even though technically in the system it is considered the subwoofer. They used a much thicker acoustical foam on here. This is really thick stuff. It's almost like a closed cell, even though it's clearly open. It's not as open as this. This is really spongy. This is not. This is gonna have some impact behind it. They went to the full size big magnet so it can handle some decent power. This one has a 25 watt power rating at 4 ohms. This one is also 25 watts. The tweeter is 12.5 watts at 8 ohms. So both these guys were 8 ohm, which is what we saw on the meter. These both were 4 ohm. As far as the material this is made out of, this is what they should have put in the rear deck. This is like a polymica resin cone. Almost feels like plastic, but it's probably a little better. Has some form of a rubber surround, which is nice. Plastic basket. The problem with plastic baskets, especially on subwoofer drivers like this, they're great when they're in the door because they're not going to rust or corrode or anything like that. Not that we ever see too many of those with the standard baskets that are treated. But what happens is when this magnet gets really hot, this plastic sometimes isn't rated to hold that. And what'll happen is the magnets actually just fall off. As far as woofers go, like this, that is actually playing the deepest sound in the car, using a plastic basket really isn't the best idea. But this is what we took out of this car and put in the Flax Series Focal. For the sub and the rear speakers, a BHA 2105 pack harness should do the trick. There's 2 harnesses that come in that bag. One is the power harness, which isn't going to fit, but it's going to have the color wires we want on it. And the one is the rear speaker. This is the one we're going to repin to fit all those wires. Next up is the one for the power harness. We want to make sure we have all those wires pinned, meaning all 10. You could use one of these and get the BHO version of it, but it would be much much easier in this case just to order the 12206 car AV harness. That has both the male and female end. Basically, it's a T harness for this. You could order 2 of these also and not need this. We're not gonna need this because we actually have one already made up that we found in our box of goodies. What we need to do is we're gonna remove all this tape off of here, depin all this. For depinning these, we have this cool depinning tool that we do have on DNF tool drawer. Take depinner, come from the back side of this harness, just kind of push it in. It'll lift up the tooth, pull the depinner and the wire at the same time, and they'll both come right out. The other trick, if you just say, I can't get this, we're gonna not need this harness. If you wanna just cut these to remove the pins, you can do that too. Looking at these 2 plugs closer, you will notice that the gray plug has a center pin here, or center drop down, and on the black harness we're gonna use, it's more off to the left, but it does click in no problem. If you needed to, you could sand the bottom of the factory plug down. First up on the list is the brown, white, brown, blue, which is gonna be the purples. In the far corner, the brown, white is positive. We're gonna start with our purple positive. Click that in, and then we'll go purple negative. Next to that is our white purple and our white orange, which is going to be gray. Gray positive goes first, and then the gray negative goes second. Just give them a slight tug after you plug them in, make sure they're nice and tight. Flip it over on the other side, we're gonna have our white green, which is going to be our solid green, which is passenger rear. Slide that in. Then it's gonna be the green black. Then we're gonna go white, which is our solid white. And then I unfortunately destroyed my white black, so I'm just going to pin it with one of the leftovers I had. And there we go. Plug it in. Make sure none of the wires push out. We have that harness all set and ready to go. What you can do is, just to make sure that all the pins went into the holes properly, I like to take my tone generator and just go over them real quick with a tone, just to make sure everything makes noise. That one is actually out of the door right now. Have our T harness. Plug this guy in here. This one, the little nipple that's sticking down, lines up perfectly, goes right in. What we want to do is separate out the wires we're going to use, which is all the top row on the clip side, and unpin them from this side and get this extra piece off, and then we'll group them together with some shrink wrap. So I'm gonna go over to the bench and do that real quick. I'll be right back. T harness is all set. Plug back into the amplifier here, and this will go right here. And now I have my whites, greens, gray, purple. These are my signal outs. I'm thinking I'm just gonna solder some RCAs onto these so I can just plug into here. It is a low voltage output, it's not high level, so I'll be able to just plug it directly into the amplifier. We have this guy here. Only thing I need to do is attach these 3 wires here. So what I was thinking about doing for these 6 wires, put these guys, little bullet female connectors on the plug side, and then I'll put the male bullet connector on the other side. That way we can plug in, and then if we need to down the road, we can just simply unplug the wires that we've plugged in and plug these back together, and that way it'll be still a fully functional harness. That's what we're going for. That way, if we need to, we can plug them all back together. Tape up all the harnesses that we removed the tape on. The mystery of what is coming out of this factory radio, we're 100% solved. We know what we're doing. To recap, our signal for the little guys here in the door, the big guys here in the door, and the rears, all taken care of. We're gonna run new wires up to the tweeter. That's gonna be our 3-way set there. We have 4 outputs, front, rear, left, right. It's gonna go back to the amplifier. We're good there. At this point, we're all set here, which takes us to our next point. We need to get into the back. We need to make an amp rack. We need to start running wires. So we got a lot still left to do. This is a big thing off our list. This is something something you guys should be doing first before you start on anything else. If you don't know, how can you run the wires? So this is the area here we have to work with. There is no spare tire. It's just this silly little inflatable thing that's here. We're gonna relocate that into this amp board. What we need to do is grab our tape measure here. We're gonna take some measurements, try to get this shape. We're gonna use that bolt to hold it in place. We're gonna make this out of some 1/2 inch Sintra. We got 27 by 26. We don't want to go all the way to the back here. We want to make sure there's a little gap. 26 ought to leave us enough of a gap. Typically when we do it here, we like to mount the fuse to this area here for the wire we're running back. So we want to make sure we have enough room to clear the amp board. Let's go cut a piece of 27 by 26. And there we go. Now wait a minute. I know what you're thinking. Cut out a square. How come this is all round? And you're like, wait, it's what? And you'd be right to ask that. There's an easy way to do that on this car. And let me show you what it is. Remember this piece here that we took out? Well, on the back side of that is this. This is the little insulation pad they have. This peels right off. You can glue it back on when you're done. But it has that perfect arch that matches that arch there. And then really the only things you have to do is this little corner here, and there's a little bit right here, and you'll have that same shape. It's teetering right now on that little area that sticks up here, that pump. You want to push down on it and try to get that to indent into the bottom of this so that we can drill our hole. Next, put some legs on the back side of this so that it doesn't teeter, and then we'll start making our holes for the pump, for the battery, and then get the amps arranged, get the crossovers in. Gave us our little dents right here. To do is measure in from those and we'll get our screw holes and we're all good. Do is kind of lay out where everything needs to go. I think this is what I've decided on. We're gonna put this all the way towards the front. We're gonna put all this other stuff. The power wire is gonna be on this side. Fuse holder is gonna sit about here. So battery will be here. Sub amp on this side, highs amp on this side because all the signal wire is going down this side of the car. Now the one thing to keep in mind is that the wiring has to come all the way to the back of the car and then go forward. There's no shortcut here anywhere in the front because the trunk piece sits flat on top of the tire well. There's no electronics in there. There's really no way to run wire up out this way without setting the box on top of it, and the box that's going to sit on top of it, you run the risk of pinching the wire. We have to go this way and around. It means the wire is going to be a little bit longer, so I'm trying to move everything to the back. We need to make holes for the battery, holes for the pump, and then we can screw these amplifiers in place. Alright, I'm going to make a little box that this is going to set in. We just went ahead and made a simple box out of more plastic, screwed it together, sticks out about 1 inch, and this guy here is going to sit in it just like that. We've already test fitted into the car so it clears. We just need to repeat the same process and put the battery right here. And essentially all we're doing is cutting 4 sides, screwing them together, putting a bottom on it. That's it. And then we router it out. So we just cut our 4 pieces here, take some double-sided tape. I'm going to tape this together. The reason why we're using tape is that way we can get this exactly the right size. We want it to be nice and tight on this battery. We don't want the battery flopping around. There we go, we have a nice tight fit on the battery. We're gonna put some more double-sided tape on this, and we're gonna router that shape out on here. It's really close to how we want it. We're just gonna knock just a little bit off of this, mainly so that it'll be like this deep right here and clear this front. Right now it's sitting up a little high. It's kind of okay in the car. We'd have to make a funky shaped bottom, but it's at 1.5 inches. We're gonna take it down to 1 1/8 inches. But before we do that, put 4 screws in it to hold it nice and tight together. We have it to the right thickness. The other thing we want to do is also put a bottom on it. Put some more tape on it, and we'll make a bottom. Because this is the bottom, put some screws in it. I had put an F on here to label which way is front. We're just going to put some tape on here just so we can use it for lining up, but it's not going to be anything else, just so we can line it up, stick it in place, and then screw it on from the front. I'm gonna test fit it again. There we go. We have our hole here that we talked about earlier. Battery goes here, pumpy thingy goes there. Actually, as you can see, it's nice and balanced. We do need to put a brace up the center here when we're done. That's what that is gonna set on so that it doesn't cave in, but we'll save that for last once we get all the amplifier and all the wiring in. sound deadening the car, which like he's doing here, is a great idea. But one of the most common forgotten places, which is weird because it's one of the easiest places to do, is the trunk lid right here. This is the thing that rattles quite a bit. This customer's opted to have us do it. A lot of people don't. Make sure you get in all the nooks and crannies. And the secret to doing this is make sure that you figure out, like this has a piece of carpet that goes over it. This little guy right here. Make sure when you're doing it, like in this case, this has this nice lip. So we know we need to stay inside of that lip. You also want to make sure you get up inside of here here and any place that you can get into the inside metal. If you don't have a nice dented lip like this, take maybe a grease marker or some blue tape, but map it out, because nothing is worse than when you do one of these and you can see the roadkill on the portion of the trunk that isn't covered with the carpet. The other thing you can do too is constantly put it up there and check to make sure you don't see it. So what we got going on is the 4-channel is here, the monoblock is here, the tire pressure thing is right here, so this comes right out. We have our battery in place. It's locked down, it's in there super tight, locked in place with this top brace right here. We have our crossovers. All the wiring runs out the back of the car. We have our grounds, there's a factory ground point right here in the car. There's a second ground point here. These are all the speaker wires and everything. They're gonna run down this side. This is the pigtail that's gonna go to the fuse holder in the back here, and then we'll add the ground once we get this in the car so we can cut it to length. And then lastly, we ran a 10-gauge subwoofer wire. That's gonna go up and wrap around, and up in the corner in the trunk somewhere it's going to split off into 2 because the box we has 2 speaker cups. So this is all set. Let's get this into the car and start running some wires. Ow.
Did you make the sound of this?
No, I have to get in here before I can make the sound of this. I don't know the height. I have to make that center brace to hold the material up, the big centerpiece. Put a cross member across here and take a measurement, and then I can make my center brace. I also have to put the screw in that's gonna hold this whole thing in place. The easiest way to figure out the height between here and here is to take a straight bar, rest it on the area that you're trying to get the height of, and then measure from the floor up. In this case, we have 4.5 inches. We need to make a center brace that is 4.5 inches tall. So what we cut here is a piece of 1-inch Sintra. It's 16 by 4. We made it a 1/2 inch shorter because what we're gonna make is a T-base so that we can screw it down to here. First thing we need to do is get it in here and figure out where we need to cut for the wires that we have. Make 2 notches in this, one for the bolt and one for this power wire, and then we'll make our T-base. So we added our T-braces on it, and that gave us the height we need for our cut throughs. This will sit just like this. Test fit our cover just to make sure. Solid, that'll hold up the box. Add a couple screws to it so that it'll stay in place. I wanted to T-mount it in so that if we need to, we can remove it easily so that we can get to things. What we need to do is get this carpet panel off. We're going to get the carpet panel off that's behind the camera here. Add our ring terminals to the grounds. Get our fuse holder mounted. Get this thing all wired up.
The next thing we want to do, pull the pillars out to replace our tweeters. This one has a clip. There you go. It's really tight, like really tight. This is the clip what I'm talking about. Ends like this and then twists, and then the second one you kind of twist it twice, pull it out, then you just pull it carefully, pull the other side. We can do both at the same time. We're not gonna use the existing wire because we're going to run wire from the crossovers to the tweeters. Go to the bench. These tweeters actually snap in nice. Also, we're gonna put a little bit of foam on top of it. Tweeter is done. We put some quick disconnects.
Battery is in, 0 gauge. As you saw, we had to pull this bucket out. We mount the 0 gauge fuse holder over on the side here. Comes up, attaches. One thing you're gonna wanna do on these though, they powder coat these terminals now that this has to get connected to. You need to get rid of that powder coating. So you need to take a wire brush, you need to sand this whole thing off and make it silver again so you get good contact. They look like this. Bar that goes through, and then this top piece here, you need to make that all silver again, just like we did there. If you don't remove the powder coating, what can happen is the voltage loss, substantial voltage loss. We've ran into this problem before with F-150s as well as the Mustangs, and you gotta clean it off of everything. The way it works is there's two pieces that sit on top of one another and they slide over back and forth as you're tightening the bolt. If you don't remove the powder coating there, it never actually touches the battery terminal. Wire wheel, have some fun. Here we are back at the front corner of the car. We finally have all our wiring. Now we just need to get these wires hooked up. Plug in our amplifier, black plug. The brown plug is already plugged in. Plug in the other end of the T-harness. Soldered on some female RCAs. Plug in our male RCAs that we ran from the back. Also ran a remote turn on just in case. We always do that regardless of whose amplifier it is. Just saves us time down the road in case something goes wrong. What we have is our 6 speaker wires. These red 16 gauge here are going to be for the tweeters. The blacks are for the mid bass, and then the white and the gray are for the mid range. That means we're going to go up into here, and then these blacks we're going to have to solder into this harness here. What I want to do is slide some white and gray heat shrink over these just to differentiate them now that we're up here when I know where I'm going to cut them. The wiring is all set and ready to go. The only thing we got left are our tweeter wires. We have to run this one over to the passenger side. The other one will just plug in right up in here. We're pretty much done here. For woofers, he's going with the new R series woofer. On these woofers, they have this set of terminals here. This is a dual 2 ohm. What we're trying to get at the amplifier is a 2 ohm mono load. For that, we need 2 4 ohm drivers. This has 2 2 ohm voice coils. In the box, Alpine gives you these cool little jumpers right here that allow you to just like plug in like this and jump it so that now that's 4 ohms. You can also come in here like this. This would be the preferred method for me. I don't like to use these at all, only because I've had a bad experience with them. That's not to say that I haven't installed hundreds of them in the past. All it takes in my mind is 1 or 2 bad and I'm over it. It's so much easier just to do my own jumper. You could cut these 2 little terminals off and just use this piece of wire and make a jumper of your own. We're gonna take our box, we're gonna solder in some 12 gauge that's gonna clip into here. We'll screw these in. We also have grills that are gonna go on these because Alpine has this wonderful surround here that is a real pain in the butt to get on and off. They make these grills right here. So this is a fully insulated grill. So this sits over it like this. This will keep that all protected. Depending on whether it's an R series or an S series, you have 2 different little clips. They're gonna go into the sides here. And of course it comes with the placards that is an R or an S. According to the instructions, if you're doing the R, you're gonna want the black ones. If you're doing the S, you're gonna want the white ones. And the main difference is the height. Come over here to the screw hole and you just kind of wiggle this guy in. See the little curve to it there? That's designed to contour to the grill and holds that grill, locks it in nice and tight. Once you're done with that, it comes with a new surround. What makes this one different is it has notches along the edges here for these guys, so it makes room for those. And then you just hammer it on, you put your sticker on, and you're all set. 12 gauge soldered into our speaker cup down in there, nice and secure. Little 10 gauge jumper here. And then Fernando's finishing up in here. We ran a 10 gauge back. Behind here, we soldered in 2 12 gauge. Coming out here, we're getting ready to put some ferrules on the end here to go into the speaker cup. Set the box in place. That way we can start tuning this thing. We're almost to the tuning point. Almost. We also need to get these side panels put back in before we start tuning too. Ooh, do you hear that? Do you know what that sound is? That's the sound of a speaker popping for a polarity test. You know what that means? What does that mean, Fernando?
Polarity check.
And what does that mean? We're almost
there
Yeah.
to tune.
Here you go. All right, we're all good. In a case like this where you can't really get in there, you can also do it from the back side. For example, if you come from the underside of the speaker, it should meter the opposite of what it would from the inside. The inside was reading green. From the back side of the speaker, we should be getting red, red, green, which we are. If we get that on both, then we know they're moving the right direction. Polarity test is done and good. We plugged in that guy right there. This blue cable here is the USB that plugs into the D4.800. If you're plugging in your D series or your DM or any one of the audio controls, as soon as you plug it into the laptop and launch the app, it's going to check the software version on it to make sure it's up to date. It's not up to date, let it run its updater software. Make sure that the app on the computer, make sure that's up to date, because they constantly update these things. You want to make sure you have the latest version of it. For those of you guys that have never seen the software before on the audio control, it basically has 3 views: input, output, and dashboard, which is a combination of these 2 here. The first view is going to be input. Input is going to do is, if you scroll down here, this is going to show you that you have signal. Turn the volume up. You can also increase or decrease the gain. Check the input coming into front. Go to output view. You can right click on it and put front. This is rear. You can call this sub because it's going to be a sub output. Inputs 1 and 2, we're going to feed them off of just the front inputs. If you wanted to, you could feed everything off of the front input. Channels 3 and 4, we want that to be rear only. On this side, this is your crossover. 1 and 2, we have that at 90. We'll decrease that to 80. Come back and check 3 and 4. We have our basic crossover set up here. Here's our EQ. Go to dashboard view. We have our input RTA here, and here's our output RTA. You can adjust the EQ here, and that'll affect the way this sounds, and this will change. Dashboard view is just a summary of everything we've done. It's an idea of what this thing can do for you. The cool thing is you can download this to your Windows or Mac. You can play with it all you want to get an idea, get a feel for this. We are done in the trunk. Everything nice, mounted, put back together. Covers are on the amplifiers. The only thing left to do, put the floor in. We're gonna slide the woofers forward, find out where they sit in here, fold the seats up. We'll mark this, we'll put a brace there so that this doesn't slide around in the trunk. Marked it with the grease pencil, that stuff washes right out. So we know where the box needs to sit. Pull this back out. We're gonna take a piece of plastic like this that's thick. We'll screw that down from underneath so that the box will push up against this, but if you need to get it out, all you have to do is lift the box up and it'll slide out. So there's the brace screwed in place. That'll keep the box from sliding around. Nice and solid. Yeah. This is an awesome sounding system. There's no question about it. I got nothing else. You got anything?
Oh, man.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. This is nice. This almost makes me want to buy a Mustang so I can put a 3-way set up front. I love this.
Yeah.
The factory 3-way. Yeah. Well, totally teasing me.
But no.
But no. All right, guys. Fernando?
All right, guys. So, on to the next one.
Bingo. You guys have a great night. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.